But first, let's stick with the biggest story today, Trump's trade war. Now, mostly you'll hear commentators criticising the tariffs, but senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, John Lee, writes in the Fin Review that many underestimate Trump's economic wit at their own peril, saying that on economics and trade, there's sophisticated reasoning and method behind what Trump is doing. One may still strongly disagree with it, but understanding it is necessary for dealing constructively with the administration on these matters. And John Lee joins me now. Great to see you again. Thanks for your
Sharri.
time.
Good evening.
So explain this sophisticated approach that Trump is taking here.
For me, what Trump's trying to achieve is American reindustrialization. A lot of people talk about tariffs as if it's an evil thing. It's neither evil nor good. It's just a tool of policy. And a theory behind it, as far as Trump's concerned, is to make it more expensive for foreigners to sell products in America and incentivise American firms or American-based firms to produce for the American market. Now, of course, you have to do all sorts of other reforms to make it attractive and efficient to make stuff in America. But ultimately, the tariffs are being imposed by Trump to get companies to produce more in America. That's not an unusual or terrible policy objective. He just has to do a lot of other things to ensure he gets the outcome that he wants.
And this would be popular, of course, in the Rust Belt states.
It's the Rust Belt states, but there is a pretty broad consensus throughout America, outside the East and West Coast cities, and I travel through America quite a fair bit, that a lot of American trade partners have their own forms of protectionism, tariffs and other so-called behind-the-border measures which have come at the expense of American industry. So yes, there is an element of wanting America to start making things again. But that speaks to both trying to increase the outcomes for the American middle class, but it's also a geopolitical argument that America needs industrial resilience because we're not living in the benign world that we were in the 1990s and 2000s.
Look, and we saw, the dangers of reliance on Chinese goods, for example, during the COVID pandemic. But in terms of pushing up the price of goods, because this will mean that imported goods do become more expensive. So, what about the cost pressures and the risk of a recession?
There's clearly risk involved here, and in the short term, there probably will be increases in prices because the cost inputs have gone up. The theory and the practice of what they're trying to achieve is, yes, imported parts and goods will become more expensive for American consumers, but America needs to make sure its energy is a lot cheaper, and Trump is obviously doing a lot of things to achieve that. America needs to deregulate, it needs to change industrial relations to make it a lot more flexible. So these so-called supply-side reforms, they're very difficult to do. I have no idea whether Trump will succeed, but if he does those supply-side reforms, then he may achieve something close to what he's after. If he fails in those supply-side reforms, then yes, it could actually be an economic disaster for the Americans.
Could be a disaster for us as well. Just in 2 days, $50 billion wiped off the ASX. How should Australia be handling this?
Well, just on the stock market, I mean, stock market prices in the short term, they're driven more by psychology, and it's really fear and greed than it is about fundamentals. So we have.
But there will be real impacts for the 100,000 workers in the steel industry. We don't know the exact figures on how many companies will be affected by these tariffs, but it will be substantial.
It will be substantial, but I'm distinguishing between the impact on the steel and aluminium industries, which clearly won't be good, and a broader stock market, which I think is unnecessarily pessimistic at this stage because we have no evidence whether it's what the outcome's going to be. In terms of how we should handle it, and I saw parts of your show earlier, look, the Albanese government does have a problem with the Trump administration. There's a personality problem, which you spoke about a few minutes ago.
I just might remind viewers or tell viewers that you are close to parts of the Trump administration.
I do speak to some people in the Trump White House, and yes, they are very aware of past comments made. But it's not just the personality issues, and that's serious. We can't get past that. But it's not just the personality issues. I think the Albanese government treats the Trump administration and Trump himself like he's an idiot, like he's a fool, like he's doing self-destructive things because he's too stupid to know otherwise.
Very patronising.
Well, if you treat an American president like that, then he's not going to respond the way you want. And I should say as well that Trump has defined not just American politics, but American policy, industrial policy, foreign policy, policy towards China, views on globalisation. Trump has defined American foreign policy and domestic policy for the last 10 years. Whether you agree with him or not, he's clearly a substantial person. He's going to be transformative one way or the other. So if you're the Australian government, Albanese or otherwise, you really need to understand what is happening in America rather than just ridicule what you see.